Thank you. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all during lunch here. First lesson of the day is, anybody have somebody in your life that has told you, hey, you need to meet somebody before, and then that name keeps coming up over and over and over again? That was Brian Brandt for me. For years I'd been told, you need to meet Brian Brandt. You guys would really get along. You really would. And about 2 years ago, I finally picked up the phone and called Brian. And over the last 2 years, we figured out we have a lot of similar passions. We have a passion for God. We have a passion for our family. We have a passion for developing others. And you know what? We got a passion for barbecue. And if you want to find people who are in training and development and growing leaders in Tyler, Texas, if you go to lunch at any barbecue spot, you're probably going to run into one of us there. So just look for us there. But I appreciate the introduction as well. It's always nice to have your mom write your introduction. That's a good thing. So what it didn't say is, yes, I am a West Point graduate. My father was a West Point graduate as well. And while I was at West Point, my father was the head of the physical education department at West Point. And the official title of the department head of the physical education department was probably the coolest title you could ever have. The Master of the Sword. Okay? The Master of the Sword. Guys, especially guys, probably say, yeah, I'd like to be the master. That'd be great. I'd be the master of a toaster. I mean, that would be a good title to have. I'm the master of something. He was the master of the sword because originally the Department of Physical Education was the fencing department. So they kept the title, and it was really neat. My dad had a parking spot that had a sign, Master of the Sword. So I'd go to his office and I'd say, that's my dad. That's pretty cool. That's my dad. But as a West Point cadet, all of us, all the men at West Point, had to take boxing class. Now, anybody here ever box? Raise their hand. There's a few women in here who box. Anybody here was a good boxer? Let me tell you a little bit of something about boxing, what good boxers and bad boxers have in common. Good boxers and bad boxers who are freshmen at West Point have this in common. They have to box 3 times a week. And every day, whether or not you're a good boxer or a bad boxer, you wake up that morning knowing that somebody is going to hit you in the face that day. It didn't matter if you were good or you were bad. It just mattered the number of times you got hit in the face that day. So I would be sitting there, and I could have calculus coming up. I could have an engineering exam. It didn't matter. No matter what I had coming up, all I could think about was, today I'm going to get hit in the face. Now, the interesting thing was, you go back to the beginning here, my father was the one who was making us take boxing class. And so I would go to boxing class, and it wasn't my father teaching boxing class. It was some other lower-level officers, a captain or a major, teaching boxing class. Now, you hear a lot about engagement at work. This man was very engaged in his work because, think about it, he was about ready to get his boss's son in the ring with him. Think, if you could put your boss's son in a boxing ring with you, and you had license to do what you needed to do with that person, that kid at that time, would you be engaged at work? He was very engaged at work. As a matter of fact, he'd pull me in the ring and he'd say, we need a volunteer, Cadet Anderson, step on in here. And I'd step into the ring and he said, I want you to block a jab. I want you to demonstrate how to block a jab. And so he'd line up and he'd say, now protect yourself, Anderson. I put my hands up and he'd just start throwing his punches. And basically all he said was just like what Andy Stanley said, no, no, no. I mean, I was just taking shot after shot after shot. And he was having a great day. But here's the thing. Yes, we did take boxing, but West Point's not a boxing school. Yes, I took engineering. As a matter of fact, U.S. News and World Report said West Point was the top engineering school in the country 2 years ago. West Point is not an engineering school. West Point builds leaders. It is a leadership school. West Point takes 18-year-olds every year, about 1,600 18-year-olds, and 4 years later turns out 1,000 leaders. And these leaders, the purpose of West Point states, the purpose of West Point is to develop leaders of character for service to our country. So leaders of character. Let's talk about leadership philosophies. My leadership philosophy goes right along with this. Leadership is a blend of competence and character. Leadership is a blend of competence and character. So when you think about that, you say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Well, competence. Let's talk about competence first. Competence is really the price of admission into leadership. You're not going to go to work for anybody where they say anymore. It might have been that way in the past. Well, we're going to get them up to speed once he's there or once she's there. You got to be good. You got to have the skills. You got to have proven yourself before you even get there. They're not going to promote you. They're not going to hire you there. Okay? But the thing is, so the competence is a given. Even managerial competence, being good at managerial skills, that's a competence thing. So what about character? When you think about the word character and competence together being leadership, think about this. Think about any leadership failure you know about. Maybe there's some people you worked with. Maybe there's something in the news. Have those failures ever been an issue of a lack of competence or a failure in character? It's not competence where people fail. It's character. Yet over and over and over again in corporate America, we keep training competencies. We keep training people on these skills, this skill, that skill. We want more skill out of our people. Yet the failure always comes in the character area. I asked you to think about something in the news. Maybe some of you thought about something that happened in the last couple of years. Penn State. Was it that Penn State didn't know how to run an athletic department? Everybody knows Penn State knows how to run an athletic department. They had national champions over and over and over again. It wasn't about being able to run an athletic department. It was about when they got tested, when their character got tested, when somebody should have stood up and said, we got to get this guy away from kids. We got to speak out and get in front of this. 10, 15 years ago now. Somebody should have stepped forward. It wasn't that they were incompetent. They had a failure in character at that moment. They had a failure of character at that moment. Now, what is the definition of character? I mean, here's the thing. We have politicians talk about character all the time, but they never define it. Aristotle and his teacher Plato actually started with the idea that character is what you think about and what you read about. Aristotle took it a step further. He said, no, it's beyond that. It's not just what you think about. It's not just what you read about. It's about what you do. You will become just by doing just acts. You become courageous by doing courageous acts. And so when you're developing character, this is what West Point was doing in boxing class. Developing courage. So every time I had to step into that ring, I had to be ready to operate. It was a controlled situation, but I had to go in there and I had to be ready to operate. And so every time I stepped in that ring, I was facing my fears. It was preparing me, as my father used to have to do. He used to go down to Congress, and he had some people in Congress who felt like making these young men do boxing was barbaric. And he would go down and testify in front of Congress, and he would tell them, this is the closest these young men will ever come to facing the fear that they're going to have in battle. And what's it have in common? Well, when I got in the boxing ring, I had to remember my plan. I had to keep my hands up. I had to protect myself. I had to operate. I got graded in graded bouts based on whether or not I kept my cool in the face of being scared to death. I was going to get hit in the face. I had to keep my hands up. I had to keep my cool. It wasn't whether or not I knocked the guy out. It was about I kept control and I kept to the plan when I got in the ring. Sounds like what a young lieutenant would have to do in Afghanistan these days. Doesn't matter. It's not about just crossing the line, seeing the bad guy and going crazy. Because if you do that, you lose sight of the plan. You kill your men. You have to keep your head about you. You have to keep a controlled aggression. That's what that was teaching us. Now, when we talk about developing character, character starts with our thoughts. So what do we think about? Now, we all think about sometimes some pretty wrong things, especially when we're driving on Broadway. Okay? You don't want those thoughts always to come out of your mouth, but that's the next step. What you think about then becomes your words. Your words then form your actions. Your actions repeated over time form your habits. And your habits form your character. Okay? Your habits form your character. Our character is our habitual way of operating. How we are habitually is who we are. So, if I tell the truth once in a while, am I a man of character? A man of integrity? No. If I'm in the habit of telling the truth over and over and over again, that's who I am. I'm a man of integrity then. If I help the little old lady across the street once in a while, am I a servant? No. But if I'm in the habit of serving people over and over and over again, yes, I am. It starts with our thoughts. We've been here thinking about these things that people have been speaking to us about today. That's what you're working on right now, your thoughts. Your thoughts become your words. Your words, over time, form your actions. And your actions, as you repeat them, become your habits. Think about that. All of our habits begin and end one decision at a time. Each time I decide to do something, it makes it easier to do it the next time, doesn't it? Each time I decide to do something, the good stuff and the bad stuff, it makes it easier to do it the next time. Smokers know that. Each time I pick up a cigarette, it makes it easier to do it the next time. Because I smoke a cigarette once, does that make me a smoker? No. But the habit of smoking does. Just because I lie once, does that make me a liar? Not necessarily. But if I'm in the habit of not telling the truth, guess what I am? I'm a liar. So it doesn't matter what you say. I talk about our words. Our words form our actions, hopefully. But we all know people who say one thing and do another. What do we call somebody who says one thing and does another? Hypocrite, right? My kids know that. My kids know that's a hypocrite. But we all want to say we're people of integrity. But if my wife calls me and asks me what time if I have left the office yet, and I say, I'm just packing up, honey, and literally my briefcase is on the other side of the office, am I a man of integrity? There are no small tests to our character. They're all big tests. So just like in the boxing ring, which seemed like a small thing, if I'm used to giving those little white lies, am I going to be ready when I'm really tested? Was Penn State ready when they really were tested? As leaders, we got to prepare our organizations for when they're going to be tested. We talk about culture in organizations. Lots of times in these days when you read business magazines, the culture of an organization is whether or not there's casual Fridays and what type of, and what type of perks you get at work. That's not really culture. I like to talk about organizational character. What's the character of my organization? Okay? When we think about the character, it's how we are. It's our demonstrated values with our customers and with each other. So it's real easy to have character and be people of integrity and servants with our customers, right? I mean, we're so customer focused. That's very simple. But what happens when the customer's not around? That's also part of our organizational character as well. If there's ugliness in your office, it doesn't matter what values you have on the wall. That's the character of your office. It's not the values on the wall that form your organizational character, it's your demonstrated values. Your demonstrated values. So as leaders, how can we develop that? Well, this is a great start. You're here at Leadercast. You're hearing great principles of leadership here. You walk out of here, what do? Well, if character starts with our thoughts, the next step is our words. So what do you do when you go back to your office? What do you do with this information? Do you share it with anybody? Do you have your people who are here get together and talk about this? As you talk about things, then when it's time for your people to get tested, it's not the first time they've even thought about what they might do if their integrity is tested at work. If you've never lifted 50 pounds, do you think you're going to be prepared to lift 300 pounds? Boxing class was getting me ready for the 300-pound lift I was going to have to do later on in my life. Boxing class was 50 pounds. sitting around a room talking about character issues and talking about leadership with people on your team, forming your organization's character, or is that 50-pound lift that you're doing? It's that 50-pound lift that you're doing. So what do? You take some of this material that you've been given and you share it with people. You go to websites, you look at blogs. Some of you have seen the stuff I've written. But the point is, it doesn't matter. Any of these people up on screen be a phenomenal resource for you to use with your people. What's the character of your organization? Not just the culture. What's the character? What's your character like? What are you doing to form your character? What are you doing to grow in character? Now here's my point. If a tree stops growing, it starts dying. If a tree stops growing, it starts dying. You're here because you want to grow. Bravo. What are you going to do next? What's next? What are you going to do with this? You've just gained a bunch of knowledge. You just gained a bunch of thoughts. How are you going to take that thoughts and put it into action? Wisdom is not what you've gained here. Wisdom is knowledge applied. You just got some knowledge, and you're going to get some more later on today. What are you going to do with it is going to decide whether or not you're wise or not. Last statistic I want to share with you is 75% of people, I heard this at a conference not too long ago, 75% of people in America spend 75% of their time on work. Not in work, not in the four walls of work. They spend 75% of their time on work. That means on the way home from work, they're thinking about work. On the way to work, they're thinking about work. That means when they're in the shower that night, work is in their mind. When there's a downtime between putting the kids to bed and everything else, they're thinking about work. 75% of their life is spent on work. If you are the leader of people at work, that should overwhelm you right now. Because guess who that person is spending the other 25% of the time with? Spouse, kids. The impact that you have on people's lives doesn't just end when they leave work. They take it home with them. Leading is a sacred calling for all of us. Not just for the people who had the title, as John Maxwell said, but for all of us. So start with your character. Start thinking about, what am I doing to shore up my character? What am I thinking about? What am I filling my head with? Who am I hanging out with? Who am I talking to? What are we talking about? Then start taking some action. Each time you make that one step, it makes it easier to make the next step again. That's how new habits are formed. And habits are what determine your character. I got some pictures up here. They weren't my contemporaries at West Point, in case you were wondering, but these are some famous West Point graduates here, and they all took boxing class. Some of them are better looking than the others, and I would say that probably has to do with how good they were at boxing. As you can probably tell, my nose bends pretty easily. But I know we have coming up here, the next speaker on the docket is also a West Point graduate, Coach K. Now, if anybody knows who Coach K is, he's the coach at Duke. I had the opportunity to babysit for he and his wife when he was a basketball coach at West Point. And I also went to his first basketball camp. Everybody used to call him Coach Krzyzewski then. But now that he's 4 national championships, nobody gets his name wrong, do they? And when you've got 4 national championships, you become an initial, a Coach K as opposed to Coach Krzyzewski. But he's going to be coming up next. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody here today. I just want to leave you with this. What are you doing to grow your character? That's the thing that's going to make the difference for you and your organizations. It's not about the skills. It's not about the competence.